it's Lee from colouringqueen.net, and today I thought we'd go back to the Klara Markova colouring picture that I'm doing for a few colour alongs, my colour along, plus the supporting the Ukraine colour along, where you colour in blue and yellow. You don't have to colour the whole picture in blue and yellow, just one or two elements if you like. If you can colour the whole picture in blue and yellow, then, you know, do it, but I wasn't able to, so I've been colouring offline for a little while on this picture and doing basically the leaves and whatnot. And now I am back to finish it, and I think I might have been a little bit overly ambitious with trying to do it blue and yellow, so I've added the green and not too many other colours I'll be using, so anyway, I don't think it's going to turn out to be a fave, to be honest, but anyway, these things happen, and at least I've got a spare of this colouring book that I can colour it again if I wish. So I think it's been a couple of weeks since I spoke to you guys and had a chat, and lots happened in that time for us. We've had a pretty busy week, which is why I didn't get to upload anything last week, and yeah, time's just ticking away, and unfortunately I never got what I wanted done, which is, you know, life. So I hope you guys are all doing well. We're okay here in lovely Queensland. We've kind of dried out from the recent floods and whatnot, but we are getting rain again all over the weekend, so hopefully I'll get a chance to get out in the garden. I pulled out so much stuff the other day when it was sunny because all of my flowers had sort of got waterlogged and whatnot, so I had to basically pull most of them up because they were sort of dying from too much water. But would you believe, with all the water that we've got, and still with a lot of places not open and won't be open for a long time, my ground is as dry as a bone, and I actually had to water the garden a few times this week, and it really needed it today. All the flowers were looking droopy that survived my cull, but I know it's going to rain in the next few days, and it's going to rain for a few days, so I didn't bother to water it, figuring they're going to get a big drink from Mother Nature anyway. But it's unbelievable with the amount of water that we've had that the ground could actually dry out. So anyway, we've had a few, you know, health things in the family. David's brother that is sort of living with his mum and minding her because she's nearly 80 and she's got a lot of health problems. They live in Sydney. Unfortunately, he caught the, you know, that thing that's going around the world that we don't talk about, and he had it really badly. Had to call the ambulance a couple of times, but unfortunately they wouldn't take him to hospital because of, you know, what he had, and so he basically had to deal with it himself. And because his mum's very frail and she's got a lot of health issues, they're basically isolated within the one house, and it is a tiny little 2-bedroom house, so they were sort of texting each other, and she would make him food and sort of leave it out in the kitchen and text him to say it was ready, and then he'd mask up and come and get it type thing. So, and David's mum doesn't cook, so that must have been all new for her because he does the cooking. So yeah, thankfully he is now over it. Not completely, he's still not feeling that great, but he said it was absolutely horrible, and his whole throat felt like he had a cactus down there, and yeah, just terrible. And I mean, we were thinking about going to Sydney, but thankfully, you know, we didn't because, you know, first of all, he was sick, and then just after he started to recover, his mum got sick, David's mum, and they had to call the ambulance for her. She didn't get that awful thing that we don't talk about, but she did get pancreatitis, which she has all the symptoms for, but they can't really figure out why she's getting it. And so they did all sorts of tests, and she was in hospital for a few days, and she's home now, and she's pretty grateful to be home because she really doesn't like the hospital experience, and who can blame her for that? I certainly don't like being anywhere near a hospital. So, but she's like a frequent customer. She should get sort of like points because for ambulance rides and trips in hospital while they try and figure out what on earth is causing these horrendous pains for her, but as yet they can't figure it out. So hopefully they'll find an answer soon, and she's seeing a few specialists. So yeah, we've been super worried about them in Sydney, and you know, just so grateful that now that they're okay and you know, things can relatively go back to normal. And then of course some of you that follow our dog Buddy on Instagram would know that the other day I was so super excited because he's got a little diary where I note down all his epilepsy related things, so his medication, any changes, and of course his seizures, and I time them, and I'm sort of always looking for patterns, you know, that might trigger the seizures, and I write it all down, and I keep this extensive diary. So when I was going through it the other day, I realised that he actually hasn't had a seizure for 34 days. And I was that excited because he's only just gone on to his new diet. We've seen a natural vet that's also a medical vet as well, and they recommended like a raw food diet and all these herbs and potions and CBD oil, and so we got all of that stuff, and he'd only been on it for about 2 weeks, and looking at his diary, he hadn't had a seizure for over a month, and I was that excited. I was like, yay, we're turning a corner, it's all good, you know, this is working out really well. And so of course you know what happens when you put it out there. It's Murphy's Law, isn't it? You know, it all goes wrong. And I think I barely posted the thing, and then a few hours later he had a seizure, and we were like, oh, well, hopefully it's like one and done, and he's not going to have a cluster seizure, which border collies are renowned for cluster seizures, meaning they have more than one seizure within a 24-hour period. And so of course that didn't happen, and so then he had the second seizure and the third seizure, and it was going on all through the night and day, and in the end he had like 8 seizures, and David and I were just absolutely exhausted because we couldn't sleep, and the time between each seizure and his recovery like meant that there was only really minutes to have a sleep because it takes him a while to recover. And when he's sort of coming out of a seizure, he's really unsteady on his feet, and you have to be around to make sure that he doesn't hurt himself. And because he's quite a big dog as well, he can be a little bit destructive, like he'll stand on his hind legs and sort of get everything off the kitchen benches, or eat toilet paper, or do all sorts of things. So you have to keep a constant eye on him to make sure he doesn't hurt himself. So yeah, so I think 8 seizures we were in, and it was like 4 o'clock in the morning, and we were both just exhausted, and we knew we had to get him to the emergency vet, but we were struggling to get him able to sit up because he'd flop down, and you know, he's hard to lift if he's in a sitting position. So we ended up having to wait for him to actually get up so he could be carried down the stairs and into the car, and of course he was just exhausted and not himself by then either. He was, you know, stressed and unhappy, and so we drove him to the emergency vet, and we were able to get in at 5 o'clock in the morning, and we were both dead tired. Buddy was exhausted, we were all exhausted, and so luckily, you know, he's seen a vet, and they were able to start treatment on him straight away. But while we were just there in the consultation with the vet he had his 9th seizure, which was pretty bad, and poor little thing, he peed himself all over the floor. He must have been busting. And anyway, we'd left him there for a few hours so he could have a drip put in and be medicated, and then they rang us up and said, you know, he really needs to stay in overnight. We were hoping to get him straight home, but you know, it worked out for the best because they can monitor him and make sure he's okay. And I mean, by then we were just absolutely exhausted, and poor David was meant to go to work, but you know, he would have made it to work, but he would have been maybe half an hour late. But really, working on a construction site when you're really that tired and you've been up all night, it's not really a good thing at all. So luckily his boss said he could have the day off, and that worked out really well because I didn't want him driving, and I didn't want him on a construction site on a 7th-floor story building. So luckily that worked out well, and he stayed at home, and we were both trying to get bits and pieces of sleep, but we're still so worried about Buddy that we couldn't really sleep. And then that was the first night he's ever been away from us overnight, so we were sort of tossing and turning and waiting for the vet to call. And then the next day they said we could pick him up, and we were ready to pick him up at 10 o'clock, which is when the vet rang to say that he'd been good throughout the night and that he could go home now. But we couldn't pick him up until the afternoon because they do change over or whatnot. But anyway, we finally got him home, and I don't know what we were expecting. I think we thought that he would just be back to normal, but of course he wasn't, and he still needs to be carried up the stairs, and he's really uncertain on his feet, and they've increased his medication, and that makes him even dopier. And we've been given some new recovery medications so that we can stop these seizures from happening when they go on to like 2 or more in a 24-hour period. So that's good. And honestly, the thing was just so exhausting. I really don't know how parents deal with children that have special needs, or just even a number of children in general. Like if this is how difficult it is dealing with a large dog with epilepsy. I mean, don't get me wrong, we love looking after him and we're there for him 100%, but geez, it's tiring. And luckily David work, they actually were really slow this week, so he ended up being home all week. So today's Thursday and he's going into work tomorrow on Friday, and that'll be the first day he's worked all week because there's just no work at the moment. So worked out really good because David can carry Buddy up and down the stairs, which I certainly can't. So that's worked out really well. And plus he was able to drive me yesterday to the hospital because I managed to get an appointment at a breast surgeon. Not the one that I was originally meant to go to because she was all booked out for 6 months, and that's even on private, but another one that was recommended. And so I was able to go to the hospital in Brisbane and see her yesterday, and basically she went through in my whole Titicaca saga, if you've been following along since January on this. She said there was basically 4 things that it could be, and one of them of course is the nasty thing that we won't talk about, which both my GP and myself think that that's not really applicable because I've had 3 ultrasounds and a mammogram, and you would think that something like that would have already come up. But anyway, so that they can progress further with what this might be, I've got to have a biopsy, so I'm booked in for that on Monday. And even though I've got this huge medical anxiety, as most people know, I've been watching some hypnosis videos, and I think they're doing quite a bit to calm me down. I'll put the link below, it's on YouTube, and they've been really helpful for me. They might be helpful for someone else. So I've been watching those to try and calm myself down, and I went to see my doctor today, and even though I still haven't had the blood test, she was able to give me a needle prick thing in the finger, and that confirmed that I'm basically diabetic. My reading was really high, even though I haven't had sugar for weeks and weeks. So clearly the old pancreas is not doing its job. So I'm now got some diabetes medication, and hopefully that will help with that issue, and you know, hopefully help with just general overall things. And I'm still working on trying to get the blood tests, so hopefully I'll get there soon, and we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so that's why I haven't uploaded anything in the last few days or the week. I was planning to do something on the Sunday, and then all the whole drama with Buddy hit, and then and the number of doctors that I've had to see for my health things, and running around, and also running around the vets and whatnot with Buddy. So it's just been a really rough few days or week, and a lot of things have had to be pushed aside. So anyway, hopefully it's all good going forward. And I've got a very small story for you today as well. So my little story goes back to 1948, and it's in England, and I'm telling you this story for a reason. And even though this story is 70 years old and it's applicable to Commonwealth countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, England, UK, England, I still see people not understanding this, even though it's been the position for 70 years, and it kind of fascinates me. Here's the story. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Ollie decided that they would go and stay at a hotel in England for a week. Now, this wasn't a hotel like a Ritz or something like that, or the Savoy. It was more of a boarding house type thing, where it might be an older home that's been converted into rooms, and people rented like a room, and downstairs there would be a lounge and some chairs, and people could sit down there and enjoy themselves. So not a fancy pants hotel, just a very average hotel, or a boarding house, or a B&B, that type of thing. So anyway, they checked into this hotel, which is called the Marlborough Hotel, and it was named after the Duke of Marlborough. And when they checked in, they signed a register book, like a guest book, with their names on it, and in return they were given a room key. And they're going to stay for a week, but they didn't pay for the room in advance. They just signed in, got the key, and went upstairs, checked into their room. And these are the sorts of rooms where you might share a bathroom, and there's just really a bed and a cupboard in the room. It's pretty bare. And on the back of the door of their bedroom was a little notice, and on that notice in small print were all these terms and conditions of actually staying in this hotel room. And in total there were actually 15 of these different terms and conditions. And the basic gist of all of these were that the owners of the hotel weren't responsible for anything. So if you lost something or it was stolen, it was your problem, not the hotel's problem. Unless, of course, you gave those items to the manager of the hotel for safe custody and they were put in the safe. Other than that, you were on your own if anything happened. Now, I'm pretty sure you know where this story is going to go. So anyway, the Ollies left the hotel for a day out of sightseeing and shopping. And whenever you left this hotel, you had to hand in your key to the reception area, and they'd hang it up on a hook behind the reception desk with your room number on it and the key. When you came back, you asked for your key and you were able to go up and enter your room. So while the Ollies were out and about, someone came into the hotel, which wasn't secured in any way, and they leaned over the reception counter and took the key to the Ollie's room, and they went up to their room and moseyed about in there and found some goodies. And they did have quite a few valuables, but one of the things that they had that was incredibly valuable was a fur coat. Now, this is 1948, and fur coats are not a thing now, but they certainly were back then, and they were incredibly expensive, and a lot of the ladies really loved to wear them, and they had to be kept in safe places, and yeah, there was a whole thing with fur coats back in the day. So this was a very valuable item. So the thief stole some personal belongings from the Ollies and this expensive fur coat. Now, there was a man downstairs, a colonel, and he was just sitting in that lounge area that I mentioned before, and he actually noticed a man enter the hotel and go behind the reception desk and grab that key to the Ollie's room and then go up the stairs, presumably to the room. And he also noticed him come back out about 15 minutes later, and this time he had a wrapped up parcel in his hand. Now, the hotel porter was on duty, and he should have been keeping an eye on the reception desk and making sure no one takes these keys, but instead he was very busy dusting the actual statue of the Duke of Marlborough that the hotel was named after. So he was busy doing his dusting and cleaning and tidying of the lounge area, and didn't notice the intruder come in or go out. Now, the Ollies came back to their room, and of course they quickly noticed that there was no coat there, and they were also missing some valuables. So irrespective that they hadn't paid for the room, they still wanted to be paid the cost of the coat and the other valuables that had been stolen. And from their point of view, they'd left these items in the care of the hotel, and they were the only ones that had the key to the room. So if these things were lost or stolen, it was negligent. Now, the hotel's point of view was that under contract law, they'd put this notice on the back of the door that said they weren't responsible for anything, and therefore they're not paying. So of course it went to court, and the Ollies pursued it because, as I said, back in the day, these fur coats were incredibly expensive. Now, it was heard by a few lords, and one of the lords that decided this case was Lord Denning, and he usually has really good things to say, and so he's usually the lord that always gets quoted. And what he said was that the contract was formed when the Ollies came in and signed that register, and they were given the key to the room. Even though they hadn't paid, they'd accepted the terms of the contract by signing the register and being given the key. It was only after they went upstairs to the bedroom that they seen that there were further terms to the contract, the notice on the back of the door. And as a rule, a guest wouldn't see those terms until they'd actually been accepted as a guest, meaning the contract was already formed at the desk. You can't add in other things when you go up to your room and put them on a notice behind the door. What Lord Denning said was, if you want to add these other terms, you need to make it clear at the time that the contract's been made. So for the Ollies, that was when they signed in at the register. And you can do that either in writing or you can do it verbally, orally. But you need to let people know at the time of the contract, not after. So either at the time or before. So if it's going to be provided after the contract has been formed, you need to be able to prove that it's been accepted, and that would just rarely ever happen. Someone would have to come down the stairs and say, hey, I've read that notice on the back of the door and yeah, I'm fine with that. That's never going to happen. The time that the contract was formed was at the reception. So they can't add in these additional terms, which are called exclusion clauses, after the contract. So therefore, in this case, the hotel had to pay for the fur coat. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this case was, as I said, it was from 1948 and decided in 1949. And yet, 70 years later, people still put these notices behind motel doors. Like, I know when we've been travelling and we stay at accommodation, we've already paid at the reception area, we've already picked up the keys, we've done everything that the Ollies did, and yet I'll walk into a motel room that we're staying at, or a hotel room, and when I shut the door, there's this little picture frame behind the door with these terms in it. And it's the exact same thing as the Ollies. People are still doing it. And you can't use these exclusion clauses, or they're not effective, if people aren't made aware of them at the time that they enter into the contract. So if you're out and about travelling and you shut your hotel door and you see all these exclusion clauses, if you're in a Commonwealth country like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, England, then they don't apply unless you were made aware of those before you entered into the contract. So I hope that one makes sense, and I hope you don't get misled by it if you see it in a hotel or whatnot, because I just really can't believe that people are still doing it, which just kind of fascinates me. Now, of course, the Marlborough Court Hotel didn't like the decision about having to pay for that expensive fur coat, so they appealed the decision, but appeal court dismissed their appeal, and they actually said that the hotel had been negligent, and their negligence basically resulted in that fur coat being stolen. And they also confirmed that the notice that was behind the door couldn't become part of the contract because the contract was made at the reception desk. And so they can't be aware of things that are upstairs and nailed to the back of a door. I hope that made sense, and I hope that might be helpful for you. I ended up finishing a lot of this picture off screen. I wasn't really happy about it. I bought a new white pen and it didn't really work, and one day I'm going to get one of those fancy Arteza pens. But anyway, that's it from me. Until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.